The previous basket is under review.
The Texas Tech Red Raiders could not have been much closer to the Final Four last year. Their hearts ripped out by the eventual national champion Florida Gators in a wild affair. Probably like, would you say the best game in the NCAA tournament, Fawcett? Or do you think the Duke-Houston game, or maybe the Florida-Houston game tops it?
I would say just from a maybe style of play standpoint, I just certainly enjoyed watching Texas Tech and Florida versus the more rock fighty Houston style with either Florida or Duke. So maybe I'm looking too much at the aesthetics of the game, but I thought that when you look at Texas Tech and Florida and both teams that I do feel like we're executing at quite a high level, that was a game I really remember as one that I enjoyed watching maybe the most.
Either way, the Red Raiders were certainly knocking on the door. They were a Final Four caliber ball club that just came up a little short. They'll look a little different this year with Darrion Williams off to NC State, Elijah Hawkins and Chance McMillan graduating, Kerwin Walton as well. But they did bring back the face of the program, JT Toppin, who will be one of the highest paid college athletes in the country. We'll cut basketball out of it. I mean, he got a big bag to head back to Lubbock. And the defending Big 12 Player of the Year returning gives Texas Tech every hope that they could compete for a national championship again, compete for the Final Four. But they've retooled around him. Particularly, I think most interestingly in the front court, there's been a lot of talk, especially on the Discord, about Christian Anderson, the outstanding sophomore point guard, who I think will have a big year. They got a lot of shooting on the wing in the portal. But really, I think the moves that will define whether Grant McCasland and his group take another step are a pair of front court moves. Number one was Williams leaving and theoretically replacing him with Luan Watts, the transfer from Washington State. And maybe most importantly, and one that's gotten actually a good amount of Discord conversation going as well, Luke Bamgboye, the transfer from VCU, who is an absolute dynamite rim protector. You know, the numbers on paper don't look fancy. 3 points, I think 3 rebounds a game as a freshman. But I think if you asked any coach in the Atlantic 10, he would have been very high on the list of like the scariest dudes in the league because of his ability to protect the rim. Now, when you invest very heavily in that, I think it makes no secret that Texas Tech feels like they have to play JT Toppin more at the 4 this year. JT Toppin was I wouldn't say exclusively a 5 last year, but played a ton at the 5 for Texas Tech. Now, he's familiar with playing the 4. He played the 4 at New Mexico as a freshman next to Nelly Joseph. But I think this is a move that probably, number one, can allow Texas Tech to be a little bit better defensively, but also probably helps JT Toppin's draft stock, which may have been part of the conversation in getting him back. So I want to start with this, Fawcett. Texas Tech, when they had JT Toppin and Federico on the floor together, they played JT at the 4. Their defensive rating with that lineup was just over 83 points per 100 possessions. That's like beyond elite. That's like one of the best defenses in the country. With them off the floor, it was, very average, 101.3. Teams could get to the rim and score on them. Even, Toppin and Federico combined made one good rim protector, essentially. Like they became a real deterrent. But you gave stuff back offensively. And it does feel, at least to me, like the sort of clear edict was, let's go get a guy that can change our defense and allow us to be as good as we were in some of those lineups at times. And Luke Bamgboye is as good a rim protector as there was in the portal.
Yeah, I think, and I've got to just start here. I mean, I'm sorry to Texas Tech fans watching this. This is going to be a tough watch. Looking back at this, I still can't really believe how Texas Tech lost this game. But as you watch the score and as you watch some of these plays, look at how much Florida's guards were just getting to the front of the rim and scoring without much resistance. And I think that when you look at any of these plays, you just think like, man, if there was just one elite shot blocker who could send one of these layup attempts into the second row, things would have changed. And again, as Florida's just continuing to get guards to the rim and laying things up softly on the front of the rim. Like, man, did they need a rim protector. And it just wasn't there for them when they needed it the most. Watching these clips, you can absolutely see why Texas Tech was like, we need an eraser here. And they may have got it with Bamgboye, as you mentioned, someone who has not just great physical tools with the length, with the leaping ability, but the timing, the anticipation for someone, especially as a freshman, not leaving his feet too early, not committing fouls by taking late or taking bad angles to the ball handler. I just thought he was incredible. Some of these clips are just so good from a rim protection standpoint. Some of them almost comical, like that one. But for Texas Tech to kind of, put their money where their mouth is, for lack of a better term. They said that rim protection was important. They got a guy that maybe isn't necessarily going to help them in some different ways, but man, when it comes to blocking shots, he's going to do it. Now, I think the question is, I mean, this is someone who is not particularly filled out from a muscular standpoint so far. And you did see last year, whether it was A10 play, whether it was even kind of non-conference play with like William and Mary, I mean, Pitt, there are some players that are a little bit stronger, play a little bit more of a below the rim game, that were able to just go right at him and kind of bully him from a size and strength standpoint. So, of course, you always wonder how these guys are going to translate from the high mid plus level to the high major level. But I think that is going to be just one kind of question: is, are there guys in the league that will overwhelm Bamgboye physically, and is that a problem that keeps Texas Tech from being able to play him as much as they'd like?
Yeah, look, the way I would frame it is this: if I have a massive NIL budget, which I don't feel uncomfortable suggesting that Texas Tech was probably close to $15 million, like they were one of the highest budgets in the country, and I had the luxury of saying, hey, like, let's go get someone that is a potential game changer, but that like we can live with not being on the floor in certain matchups. Like, Luke Bamgboye is the guy. Like, there's no question in my mind that like that's the perfect sort of specialist, right? Like, he is the elite left-handed reliever in baseball, if you will, right? Like that's the value add. There are points, if I was saying like, hey, this is the only big we can get in the portal, I might not choose Luke Bamgboye, because look, at the end of the day, there are limitations there. But when you have Toppin and you have Watts already and coming in, I mean, this is a huge luxury to have. And I would also point out this, and I don't know if this was a direct thing that Grant McCasland sat down and really looked at, but I would point it out. I mean, look at the 4 teams that did make the Final Four last year and their rim protection. Come on, Malawach for Duke. Houston with Francis and Tugler. I mean, an elite rim defense. Florida with Ruben Chinyelu completely changed their team. Now, Chinyelu is a lot more physical. That was the big difference. I mean, he's 260 pounds. Bamgboye is 210. But, man, like, what he did for Florida to take them from, like, elite offense with questions on the defensive end to national championship team. I mean, it's hard to ignore that. And then Auburn with Dylan Cardwell, and then even number 5 in Ken Pom from a year ago, Tennessee with Felix Okpara. Like, those teams have had, like, the elite teams of the sport have had this type of guy on their team. Now, will Luke be that guy? We'll see. But, I think the investment makes sense from that regard defensively. Offensively is, I think, where things are interesting, because Texas Tech was able to really exploit a lot of mismatches offensively with Toppin at the 5. He could take guys off the dribble. He could, he's so mobile. He's so, he has high feel for the game. He's smart. Texas Tech will have to look a little bit more like they did a year ago with Toppin at the 4 and find creative ways to involve Bamgboye. Although I do think when you dive into the clips, Fawcett, and you pointed this out to me, the offensive stuff for Luke is maybe not as bad as the numbers would say. I'm not going to sit here and say he's like a guy we're throwing it to on the block, but there's a little bit there, which is a promising sign.
Yeah, so I think when you look at what really made JT Toppin effective, it was these short rolls to the middle of the floor. This is Texas Tech's kind of favorite play for him. Send that ball handler towards the sideline, so when the short roll comes, it's right in the middle of the floor with lots of space to operate. And you can see with Federico on the floor, they said, okay, go on the block, duck in, be available for dump offs, and look at how much space there is around that free throw line area for a Toppin without stunts. And of course, when you're looking at building around one of the best players in the country, you probably want to keep doing that. So I definitely will look for Texas Tech to continue to do that. And you can see they also did this with him at the 5, but instead of putting someone at the dunker spot like a Federico, they space it out. They play the spread ball screen, and you can see it really messes up teams that are used to sending that help from the low man. And Texas Tech had a lot of success with that as well. So continuing to do that with Toppin on the floor, with like a Bamgboye out there to put Toppin at the 4, or whether Toppin's at the 5, I think you can kind of bet that this is going to be an important role here for what Texas Tech does. When you look at Bamgboye, he was someone who was definitely more of your just run and jump big, almost like a Federico, except again, a little less physical, but man, if he gets the ball anywhere near the rim, he's got the length to throw it down. And is he going to be as physical with those duck-ins, taking away help? Maybe not as much, but he's certainly willing to do that. And like you said, I think I'm guilty of looking at his points per game and being like, well, this is probably someone who's not particularly capable offensively, probably struggles to finish. It's like, well, actually, look, he's got kind of a lot of really nice touch on these kind of floaters, hook shots. And when you look at some of that, I think that'll be big for him adjusting to just another higher level of the sport, where even if he's not just able to punch it with 2 hands every time he gets a dump off pass, you see he has some nice touch. So I'm not anticipating any large breakout type season, but I think he is going to be really capable as that dunker spot guy next to Toppin who can catch, ideally throw it down with 2 hands and leave no doubt. But even if he is going against, maybe gets pushed a little farther from the hoop because of a physical center, or spacing wise has to make his cut a little bit more outside the lane, he can kind of catch and finish with those floaters where he had really good efficiency. So I think, kind of like you said, Kevin, if we're going with the baseball metaphor here, it's like, yeah, do we need a lot of length from our left-handed reliever? No, we need him to do one thing super, super well. And yeah, I don't think you want too much decision-making from Bamgboye at this point. I don't think you want him stretching it out and taking jumpers quite yet. But if you need someone to roam the dunker spot and finish, well, he can do that. And when you're building a team around one of the best players in the country in Toppin, we know what they want to do. They want to short roll him to the middle of the floor and let him operate. Well, this is a guy around him that can do that extremely well, because like you mentioned with Federico on the floor, they had a lot of success doing this. And you got to think this is kind of a seamless next step.
Their offense did not really fall off compared to like these death lineups with Toppin at the 5 when they put Federico on the floor. It just boosted their defense a ton. And so I wonder again, what does that look like with Bamgboye, excuse me. Now I will say this left-handed reliever analogy really makes me think Brian Ralph needs to like write an article, the best left-handed relievers in college basketball. So if you're watching this, Ralph, you know your next assignment from us. So get back to work, buddy. So yeah, look, I think if anything, like the elephant in the room is that you also invested big money in Luan Watts. And Luan Watts is someone that I can go back and find the text, but I remember Fawcett texted me, must have been like mid-April of last year, and was like, man, this Luan Watts guy who's leaving Eastern Washington is like an unbelievable player. And like someone should really go get this guy. And instead, he followed David Riley from Eastern Washington to Washington State. And had the explosion that I think you anticipated. He went from a good Big Sky player to an elite WCC player, which is a very hard thing to do. And now he goes to Texas Tech to play very much a similar role to Darrion Williams. Now, part of the magic of Darrion Williams was he could kind of mismatch hunt at the 4 and play booty ball. So like, do you want to do that as much with him as a 3 and a little less shooting on the floor? That I think will be interesting. But I do think when you put on the film of Luan Watts, you do see like, I mean, I hate to even use the word diet Darrion Williams, because I think he's really that good.
Yeah, it was one of those things where it feels maybe a little bit strange to say that I think Luan Watts is underrated as a transfer, because he went to Texas Tech and, like you mentioned, got paid well, but I still just don't feel like people are talking about him enough. And last year, again, he did have this kind of quiet commitment to follow Riley when he didn't end up taking other visits, I don't believe, and just could have been recruited at a pretty high level, but now is going to be big. And this was interesting looking at Texas Tech last year, where they had this JT Toppin short roll. That was such a big part of their offense. And then with Williams, they had this guy who needed the ball in his hands a ton, which is obviously not necessarily what you want next to someone like Toppin. But Williams was extremely effective. And you can see in big moments of big games, they went to Williams isolations. Watch these little like brush screen sets from guards to go get this empty side look for Williams. And as you continue to watch the score of these games, you're going to see that at some very big moments where they really needed a bucket, such as 83 in overtime, they went to Williams isolation. So you see these brush screens get him to an isolation on the side, and he can play that bully ball. Also had this ball handling ability. Suddenly you have teams guarding 4 or 5 pick and rolls that they're not necessarily used to guarding. Not too many fours used to fighting over screens and getting back in front. And he was a really effective player for them. Was it the best fit next to Toppin? Maybe not, but he could go get a bucket. So look at Watts. We talked about that brush screen set that Texas Tech liked. Look at Washington State doing the exact same thing for Luan Watts, someone who's still a little bit smaller than Williams, but plays with that same brute force and physicality mixed in with skill. And while we saw that Texas Tech maybe went and got something a little bit different with their rim protector, looking at Bamgboye, I do really like this get because it really is they're like, okay, we got this awesome, undersized, powerful face-up post player in Williams. That was good. Well, they got a guy who reminds me so much of that, but he is a little bit smaller and he does have a little bit more perimeter ability, a little bit more ball handling. And this is where it's going to be interesting to see if he gets utilized more as a wing or in this undersized 4 role where he can face up, use some of his speed against other bigs. I do think it's pretty fascinating. And this is something that, you just look at the lineups, you think, okay, well, probably the offense would be a little bit better with maybe Watts in the game next to a Toppin if they so chose to play that way in the front court, but does it hurt the defense? Watts is a capable shooter when left open. I wouldn't say he's a great shooter by any means, maybe not even an average one. What does that do if he's at the 3? It's going to be pretty interesting, but between the pieces that they picked up, such as a Bamgboye, between the fact that, well, he does play a whole lot, Watts does, like Williams, who played at the 4. It's going to be interesting to see the lineup construction and kind of the style of play. But man, do I love Watts as a player.
Yeah, I mean, Watts was 42% from 3 last year, just very low volume, 27 makes, 64 attempts over 34 games. I do think if you're Texas Tech, you're probably betting on that being maybe 40 makes this year, 45 makes. Because you do, if he is not a threat enough from beyond the arc, you do run into some shaky stuff because Toppin's not taking a ton of threes. Obviously, we're not trotting Luke Bamgboye out to fire away from distance. And so, you get into a dicey predicament where maybe things get clogged a little bit, especially because they spent, a lot of time in the spring getting these like wing shooters. Donovan Atwell from UNC Greensboro, Tyree Bryan from Santa Clara. Like, these are guys that are sort of perfect fits in similar roles to what Kerwin Walton was doing a year ago, where like they have positional size and the ability to knock down shots. I think both will be better defensively. But, and they also have Jalen Petty, the freshman, who I know they're very, very excited about. He's been great so far since arriving in Lubbock, from what I've been told. So they'll have times where they want to play smaller, get that shooting on the floor, be able to empty things out for Toppin. And they'll have times where they say, hey, like, let's get big. And I think Watts is enough of a threat. I worry a little bit about the spacing of that lineup. He's not quite what Darrion Williams was from beyond the arc, but I love the fact that there is a clear vision to how each of these roster spots were filled, right? This is not a roster that feels like Texas Tech went out and just said, hey, we have lots of money. Let's throw money at the 7 best players in the portal and see if we can piece them all together around JT Toppin, right? They were very surgical in their approach. Shooting, rim protection, ability to play out of post-ups, right? Trying to fill a similar looking team to last year, but also maybe plug some of the holes, be a little bit bigger, defensively, not just with the rim protection, but also in the backcourt where they were just really small with Elijah Hawkins a year ago. Can we be even better as a 3-point shooting team? Can we be even better at rim protection? 10th in the Big 12 last year in rim defense, right? Or 2-point defense, excuse me. Like all of those things, I really like. I do think that, on paper, maybe this group is missing like one more guard if Petty isn't great right away. They obviously were in the mix with the Australian kid, Ben Henschel. That did not work out academically from what I've been told and what seems like everyone in the Discord has been told based on the conversation that goes on about him on a daily basis. So, that's maybe the one hole that you point at here. But, I love the approach from Grant McCasland in terms of finding guys that add clear value in key points in the game, and then finding the best lineups game to game that will fit with that. In that regard, I give Texas Tech's offseason an A.
Yeah, it's one of the best. And I think you just look at, again, what's going to be a painful game to relive for Texas Tech, but I thought they gave Florida one hell of a push. And you run that back, some of those same situations, 100 times, Texas Tech wins a whole lot of them when they were up the way they were. And then I think when you look at the roster now, you could certainly argue it's better. And you just look at it like this could have been a team that you beat Florida. They, go play an Auburn team that was injured, and then who knows what happens from there. Then I look at this year's team, and I didn't love the guard play last year from Texas Tech. And while, like you said, they could maybe use one more of those guys, I still think that's improved. And then I look at the front court. I mentioned before, man, did they need a rim protector just to make somewhat of an impact in that Florida game? Well, they've got that. Williams was a really good player. Okay, they've got a similar Williams type player in Watts, who also has a little bit more I think you look at a team last year that could have made even more noise and done even more damage than they did. And I think that the roster got better. So I'm pretty excited to see what they look like. I'm pretty excited to watch them play. I think they have a roster that also really fits how the league plays. And we saw that last year that they did pretty well in the way that, obviously did really well in the league last year. And I think that the roster is, again, even more suited to do well in that league. So really, really impressive offseason for Texas Tech, and a team that I was pretty surprised just this morning, right before we started recording, to refresh Bart Torvik and see that the roster, or however you want to phrase it, was 28th entering the season. Feels awfully low to me. I think this will be a team that I could definitely see competing for a Final Four.
12th in the 3-man weave rankings of the basket under review. I don't want to tease it too much, but I will say this. The Sports Illustrated rankings will be even a bit higher than that number. So, it'll be absolutely fascinating. I will point out evanmia.com, 23 for Texas Tech. So the numbers are not loving this group. I think I'm a buyer. If I can get over under on 20th in Ken Palm final rank for Texas Tech, I would board bet that with just about anyone on the Discord. So I'm looking forward to it. It's gonna be a fun team to watch. They will be in action with big matchups early. They play Illinois and Champaign. That's a game I will be at. So looking forward to that. We'll be back with more scout team, more in-depth film breakdowns, unlike anything else you'll see in college hoops media coming up next week. Subscribe to Basket Under Review. We'll see you next time.